Welcome to Author Blurb Podcast. I'm your host, and this is where readers and authors connect. So remember, check out authorblurb.com for all the profiles, and most of all, enjoy the show. So this is Author Blurb again. This time I'm speaking with Brian P Cleary, who I personally asked to come on just because I've read his book, Hairy, Scary, Ordinary, which, if you follow the Amazon count, there's 107 of his books. So this is just one of those that my son's had me read. I've actually lost maybe 107 times at this point. Brian, I appreciate you being on. I really want to hear more about your history, about your books, and get to know more about it because I have a feeling I'm going to end up having a larger collection of your books before the end of this year.
Well, that's good to hear.
Can you help me out and tell everyone about yourself so they can get to know you and what so have you?
Yes. I get asked a lot if I'm related to Beverly Cleary because Beverly Cleary was a prolific children's author for a million years. I am not, at least as far as I know. My name is Brian P. as in Patrick Cleary, and I started writing books in the early to mid 1990s. And the first books I wrote were pun-oriented books, and they were humorous, and they rhymed, and they were punny, and they sold very slowly. The first four books I sold were part of a deal that won contract, and I was sure that that was going to be the thing that put me on the map, and it wasn't. One day I came up with a title for a series. Now, to give you some background, I work in the creative division at American Greetings. Okay, I'm the only person in the whole company with the title that is senior editor creative content. Senior editor digital content. Okay, I'm in the digital division. So if you've got a famous person singing a song, it's likely that I wrote part of it or some of it or all of it, and those are in the e-card world. Okay, but way back when, in the early 90s, I had been working, and so I've been working there for 41 years. In the mid 90s, I was looking at a lot of the sort of devices that we use in greeting card land. Like if you ever look at the greeting cards in the rack, it might say, it's, on Father's Day, it might have a card that says what is a dad, or what is a father, or at graduation is what is education, or what they're questions, right? So it's a provocative. So I looked at that and I thought that's kind of interesting. I wasn't much of a student and I didn't love school a whole lot, which is ironic because now I've been in 500 schools across 42 states, putting on workshops of all kinds for teachers and kids. But I came up with this phrase, a mink, a fink, a skating rink. What is a noun? And then hairy, scary, ordinary. What is an adjective? I just came up with the titles. And I think email must have been relatively new to me at the time. I want to say it was 1995 or 6 when I sent an email to my editor and said, what do you think of this? And I just had those three titles.
Right.
And I had a contract in 60 minutes probably, to do those three books. So I knew that I was going to give funny, interesting, rhyming, bouncy, examples that are very illustratable, right? They're very friendly to being drawn, and those books sold really well. So of the 3 million books I've sold, a great many of those are in this Words Are Categorical series. So, which is, something like 20 deep or so by now. Right. So I went from the puns to parts of speech. When I did the parts of speech one, I started getting asked a lot to visit schools. And I got to see, all sorts of places I never would have seen otherwise. I have been in Jewish schools, Amish schools, Catholic schools, public schools. I've been in schools that were surrounded by 3 different sides by a cow pasture and just a road in front of it, I've been in one-room schoolhouses, which still exist, believe it or not, where
Hmm.
everybody is being taught at the same time. There's, three third graders, a sixth grader, and an eighth grader, and they're being taught by one person all at once. And I've gotten to experience, rural life, city life, just a lot of interesting things as a result of that. There's military schools in Europe that I've spent time, spent a few days at one of those. It's a Department of Defense school in Wiesbaden, Germany, and it's fascinating. Here you are in the middle of Germany, and everybody in the school speaks English. All the children are American. All their mothers or fathers, one or the other, or both, was in the
Hmm.
military, and you were basically in America in this little spot here until you walked outside. So
Right.
I've gotten to see a lot of interesting things, and this has been sort of a ticket to, you know, be able to experience a lot of and see the world a little bit. 42 of the 50 states, and on top of that, not only seeing, just geographically all the differences, just seeing, the way that people live. You get picked up at the airport sometimes by maybe the principal of the school. Maybe you get picked up at the airport by the head of the PTA, or just a very tired mom, who said, if no one else will do it, I'll do it.
Right.
And you spend time with these people, and you spend, they ask you what you want to eat, and they take you to the airport, and they pick you up at your hotel or take you to the rent-a-car place or whatever. So it's that part's been really interesting.
I can imagine. I used to travel for work years and years ago, and mind you, it was always interesting to see how different the parts of the country could be. At least I was stuck in America. I didn't go, other than Canada, I didn't go over to Europe or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, just that could be very intriguing. And I know with your books, if I remember right, you have over six different series. The one that I'm very familiar is words are categories.
Yeah,
So
words
you
are
emphasize
categorical. Yes, and
cats.
there's the hyphenated because they illustrated cats. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
so and that there I think I mentioned I have the adjective one, I have the adverbs and the noun books of yours. So and if I'm remembering correctly, there's 27 there.
Okay.
Uh, you have math, which you have just a whole list of different categories,
Yes.
different areas of your topics that you go into.
Very
What?
curriculum based, right? And
Oh
usually
yeah,
the formula is give an example and then say what is a, or what are synonyms or something like that, that kind of thing. So the words are categorical series. Um, Spawned later. The math is categorical and a couple of other things from there. And then there are
right,
some individual single titles and some things that were more series oriented.
right,
And later, much later, like starting with COVID, I was doing gift books that you could buy directly at Amazon, like 100 things, you know, worse than divorce, or 100 things, 100 things you should have learned by the time you're 50, that kind of
okay,
thing. So those are like you go to Amazon and they're just gift book ideas. They basically are occasion driven little gift books. Yeah.
all right,
So that's the span of them, really. I've never written a novel or anything like that.
right. Oh,
Yeah.
I understand. And
Mm.
just even like I said, according to Amazon, it's 107 titles they have on Amazon for America, and that's not including, like we were saying before, you had it in languages translated in so many different languages that neither of us, I think, speak from what you said.
Correct. Right. Right.
So, what is it that actually, once you got going with those, I mean, you have it all, a lot of it's rhymey, a lot of it's kind of upbeat when you read it for a kid. When you write cards, you're usually writing it for adults. Very few times I see it as for kids. What made you decide to actually focus on kids' books?
Well, in 1993, 4, 5, somewhere in there, I would have had three children under the age of 8 or 9. So just the world of children's publishing was more around me
Okay.
it was before that or since then. When I was a kid, Dr. Seuss was the biggest thing on the planet, and everybody could name a favorite Dr. Seuss book, you know.
Right.
And I'm one of 9 children, and my youngest siblings would have been exposed to the work of like Shel Silverstein. Now, Shel Silverstein was a big deal songwriter when I was in fourth or fifth or sixth grade, but he was not a big deal like children's poet. But he became one just a handful of years later. So my brothers and sisters that were, 10, 11, 12 years younger than me were exposed to like where the sidewalk ends and the giving tree and like the things like that I
Right.
weren't a part of my childhood. He wrote cover of the Rolling Stone and A Boy Named Sue and the Unicorn. So I was familiar with like the work of Shel Silverstein, but not
Right.
like associating that book with this person necessarily. So I've had several real like different looks at children's literature. Once as a child myself, once just in a large family, seeing how the tastes have shifted over time, and then once when I became a parent myself, you know.
All right. And what made you decide, like I said, you have math, you have like the pieces of sentences or grammar focus for nouns, verbs, all this stuff. What really made you decide to go that route? Because most kids' books that I've seen are tend to be like, let's entertain them, let's teach about like the tooth, how to catch the tooth fairy, or how to do this, or how to brush your teeth, kind of a genre.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
At some point, I probably made some kind of a conscious decision that my real audience was librarians and teachers and serious parents rather than, I mean, an 8-year-old is supposed to outgrow you pretty quickly, you know,
right,
but a teacher be teaching for 30 years, you know?
right,
So I wanted to give them a bigger bag of tricks. I realized when I was pretty young, especially, like I said, growing up in a big family, people just have different skills. There are people that are you can rely on to do certain kinds of things, and some are more academic than others, et cetera. And I wasn't particularly academic, but I was pretty creative, and not everybody looks at the world that way. And I learned at a pretty young age that my way of looking at it is not the way that maybe necessarily everybody does. I also know that teachers, work really hard, pretty stressed out, and there's a lot of testing, and there's a lot of the standardized testing and things like that. There's just a lot that's pulling at them that maybe wasn't 30 or 40 years ago. And I think the mantle of teacher as being one of the most important people in town has eroded over time a little bit. It's not because that deserves to have happened. What I mean is, I think at one time, a teacher was the most educated person in town. Maybe there was a priest or a minister or a rabbi or a judge or a lawyer or whatever. But generally, in 1950, most people weren't college graduates. I
right.
mean, and nearly all teachers are. And so I think that we have over time, I think parents have given themselves more the mantle of they see themselves on a par with teachers or something like that. I think teaching is a very hard gig today. I don't think it's for everybody. I think it's a calling, and it's hard. I wanted to give them a bigger bag of tricks, whether it was teaching poetry, which I've written a lot of poetry books, including basically kind of the how-tos. I've done a lot of I would call them, workshops, in services, whatever, for teachers, but also for students, where I'm teaching them. They're going from never having heard a particular type of poem to having
Hmm.
written one and discussed it in like 35 minutes.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. So, in going from town to town, school to school, I have had the good fortune of spending time with a lot of bright, dedicated teachers, and I have borrowed, stolen, adapted, whatever one you want to put it,
Right.
some things that they've time tested, and I had ideas that I was sure this is going to be fantastic. And you get it, 3 days in a row, you put it out in front of 40, 50, 60 people and it doesn't fly. Maybe it just doesn't have wings. Maybe that's not going to go anywhere. Whereas with 5 minutes to go before I was going to start something, I came up with an idea that I'll try this, and they loved it. So I've kept the things that worked, and I've gotten rid of the things that don't work.
I understand.
Yeah.
Now, what do you tend to find? I guess I'm going to do the kind of a two-part question here. First off, what do you tend to find that you enjoy talking about the most when you go out on these school visits, or what's your favorite book category? And then what do you tend to find teachers and the kids enjoy best?
I think that depending on the grade, that'll change a little bit with the answer. But I would say that I show a picture of myself when I was around their age. So if I'm in front of a bunch of 5-year-olds, there's a picture of me at age 5, and I want them to understand that I didn't come into the world this age, that I was once their age. And
Right,
it's hard for us to understand. I mean, I remember being kind of freaked out when I saw a picture of my dad when he was like in 6th grade or something when I was a little kid, because to me, my folks they'd always been there. I mean,
right,
and you see somebody like my age, immediately you feel like you don't have anything in common with them, maybe if you're 5 or 6 or 7. But if I show a picture, even as dated as the picture looks, as much as it clearly represents a certain specific time, there is a sense that, that's a littler person with that little haircut and those little teeth and that little tie. I mean, like I try to give them a sense of, I used to be sitting on the floor just like that,
right,
and B, some of the influences that you have, if you have a favorite book by Dr. Seuss, if you like to rhyme things, we have some things in common right there, because Hop on Pop, Cat in the Hat, a couple of others, they were all written by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, and so some of even though I'm 57 years older than somebody in the audience, perhaps, some of the very first literature that they were exposed to is exactly the same exact words that I was. And
hmm
so I try to sort of marry that up a little bit so that when we do seem like we're going in different directions, or I seem foreign to them in some ways, that we have a little basis for, I remember Hop on Pop being read to me before I could read, or whatever,
right,
by Dr. Seuss. When I'm with kids, so I like to talk to them about my influences, and I always ask them, what's an influence, and somebody usually knows, and my influences are as wide as they could be the Beatles, they could be Mad Magazine, they could be E. E. Cummings, the poet, it could be Dr. Seuss, certainly, it's Ogden Nash, the poet. There were no standardized tests when I was a kid other than the Iowa Basic, and so really teachers could unpack a whole lesson in a different way than they can do that today. I mean, if they were passionate about poetry, you could just be learning about something that most kids don't learn about till they're in college. And not everybody
right,
goes to college, so I like to expose them at a very young age to some things that to show them that interpretation of poetry, we're guessing. And that's what 19-year-olds do when they're freshmen in college, and that's what we're going to do
right.
right now when you're in 5th grade. We're going to guess what the poet meant when he said this. And so they like to feel like they're decoding something. So when I show them the puns like Jamaica sandwich, or it looks a lot like reindeer, or give me Bach my Schubert, that they like to decode things, like, what do you think the author really meant in regular English? They say, oh, give me back my shoe, bird. Exactly, exactly. So like, it's a secret language, and they feel like they've got some secret password or something like that, and they're doing something that is it's not so babyish to them,
hmm
and they're not going to be tested on it, which is nice.
Right.
Um, so those are some things I've noticed over many, many years. I've been in many, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of classrooms, but I think 500 schools over many years. Yeah.
All right. And I mean, I have to imagine at this point you really do enjoy being around the children, getting to expose them to these different elements like the ways to think outside the box and discuss like how to improve their English, their reading, their math, things like that. What what keeps you going with doing that?
Well, being, from yourself, from being on the road, it can be tiring, right? You eat
Yes.
differently. Maybe you don't exercise as much as you would if you were at home. Your habits change. Maybe a little hard to go to sleep in a hotel room. Maybe flying isn't your favorite thing. Whatever the thing is, it can be, road warriors are different kind of people, and I'm really not one. My father would be in the air 2 or 3 days a week in my childhood, for years and years and years, and he was one of those people that, people that, and if you've ever met somebody in sales who's just like, oh, well, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday I'm in Columbus, um, you know,
Yep.
calling on these customers or whatever. It's a hard gig. It really is. It's a hard life. Um, on a very busy year, the busiest year I ever had for school visits, I think 35 school visits is what I did. But there are guys that do 120 in the course of a year, So I'm really cut out more for that lower number. If somebody said, if you were to quit your full-time job at American Greetings, would you want to do 5 or 6 visits a month? 5 or 6 visits a month would be great, you know.
Right.
Um, partly because I'm saying the same thing from school to school to school, and it can just wear it. To me, honestly, the kids don't wear on me. The noise doesn't wear on me. The teachers are usually helpful and engaged. The people who show up and help you and take your lunch order and run over to Panera for you and stuff, everybody's great. But me saying the exact same words on Tuesday that I said on Monday, and not even remembering if I did we already do this thing where we did the personification and then paper noun quilt? That could be tough. Now, on a year like last year, I only did like four school visits,
All right.
and COVID cut into that a great deal, and we haven't really crawled out of it yet. Um, it seems like for many years that the number was about 16 or 17 or 18. Now remember, that's in communion with a full-time job,
Right.
So I get rid of that. So if I have a full-time job and I'm doing that, that means that I'm using, because I've been at the company many, many years, American Greetings. I mean, I have 25 vacation days a year. Okay, I don't have summers off or anything like that. I don't
Right.
have like 2 weeks at Christmas. I have like 2 days at Christmas, you know. So I'm using vacation days. So where it was taxing was that as my kids got older, you know, I wanted to be able to say, well, we're going to take a week and do this,
Hmm.
and I was essentially saying yes to a whole bunch of school visits, um, for a bunch of reasons. I mean, I was building a second career, which most people can't do. And I was building
Right.
something that was throwing off income both in publishing and in speaking. And I liked the work I was doing at American Greetings. I liked the people I was doing it with. I liked the move that I made from paper cards to digital. I have put words in the mouths of interesting people like Dolly Parton and Shaquille O'Neal and Michael Bolton and Megan Trainor and Christina Aguilera. And so it's pretty interesting stuff for a writer, you know.
Right.
And on the other hand, you go to a school and there's a big sign outside that says it's Brian P. Cleary Day today. And you go inside and all of the doors are decorated with your books. Like they're literally made into like the book cover of your books is like all the doors to the school. Then they have a Brian P. Cleary assembly. Then the music teacher has done like a Brian P. Cleary song. So there's not many jobs where people clap for you and give you money and then
Right.
ask you for your autograph. So it was a dance really between two very interesting ways to make a living. as a writer. And I knew I was going to be a writer at a very young age. I knew when I was 10. I was practicing my autograph when I was in fourth grade. And I knew that I remember reading that something like only 2.6% of manuscripts become books, you
Mm.
know. And I remember thinking, I didn't know it was that big. 2.6. I'm definitely going to be one of them. And I was.
Right.
And I say to people, you've done the hard part. You wrote a book. Send it around and do the easy part and collect rejections and live with. I mean, just let somebody else decide whether it's good enough to be in a library. Because I've had people say to me, "Will you look at my book?" And a couple of reasons why I don't want to is that every library in the country has several books in it that if you showed it to me first and said, "What do you think, Brian?" I said, "Oh, it's just not for me. It's well written. It just doesn't scratch where I itch.
Right.
But here it is in the library, and you look on the back of it and it says Doubleday Publishing or Penguin or Putnam or what. Who am I? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not the gatekeeper of the world. And the second thing I'd say is that if you show me your manuscript, and your manuscript is about a kid that gets divorced when his parents get divorced, and dad lives upstairs in the double house, and mom lives downstairs, and he goes back and forth. Well, that just means that's just one less thing I can write about because you've just told me what the plot of your book is, right? And you've
Right.
told me like the trope or the device of your book. And now, instead of a world in which everything in the world is possible for me to write about, everything is possible except that one thing you just told me. And I don't want to have that. I want to have it all be possible for me to write about. It's hard enough to write a book that gets published.
Right. Oh, I
It's
know.
harder still if everybody I know is going to tell me the story that they have because some you don't need to impress me. You need to impress one editor at one publisher. And I'm not
Yep.
an editor at a publisher. you know?
I
So I would
understand.
want to be helpful with somebody and put them in tell them not to pay a lot of money for something or to get sucked into something where it's all vanity and it's all preying on your ego and that you have to do everything and you have to bother your friends and get them to sign up for whatever. I mean, I might advise against something like that, but shoot, there's all kinds of people that have had success in publishing that didn't have any input from me at all, and they did just fine.
I understand. So
Yeah.
let me ask this, and if I can. So, like because the category one sticks out, and I've looked at some of the other covers, like the math, and there's let's see here, phonics, fun, and like I said, you have a whole bunch. So just trying to list them all off is
It's
the
easier actually to go to Amazon and type in Brian P. Cleary than it is to remember even the names of 10 titles. It just
oh
is
yeah,
because they will neatly sort it for you. And once in a while you'll get a book that I didn't write, but maybe somebody who wrote a scholarly text for teachers or something like that listed me with a dozen other authors that are curriculum based or whatever. Yeah. But
I
it'll
understand
still pretty neatly sort it for you.
exactly.
Yeah.
But with all that, so a big part of that I've noticed, and I didn't notice this until I started reading with my kid, and the graphics, the illustrations, along with the words, are a huge part of a kid's book.
Yes.
How much involvement did you have with that? Did you choose the cats as to make the category, or was it they said, "Hey, let's put cats in here because kids love cats"?
Hmm?
What was it
So
more of?
good question. And as is my practice, a long answer to a short question. So a wonderful illustrator named Jenya Przmitsky came up with the cats, and I had wanted to call the series Grammar's Cool, like almost sounds like grammar school,
Right.
okay? And like grammar apostrophe S, cool. And they said, how about if we use these cats? And it was words are categorical. And I liked it immediately. I mean, I liked it
Mm,
much better than what I had come up with. And I think maybe I had a couple of other suggestions and it doesn't matter. So Jenya was the one, she did the first three, at least the first three books for me. I've had illustrators from Moldova, um, Montreal, Toronto, London, uh, places in the middle of Europe, a handful of Americans. So I've had many, many illustrators from all over. I think somebody's from South America. In fact, I'm pretty sure they are. Um, so yeah, I've had a lot of different illustrators. And sometimes you are with an illustrator until maybe their schedule doesn't allow for it anymore. Like maybe they're going to say, hey, we're going to be doing 8 books this year. Are you up for 8 books? And they might say, well, I was up for the 3 that we did last year, but 8 in one year, if I'm teaching or whatever else they're doing,
Right.
it might not work for them. And so I had a lot of I've had at least 3 different illustrators do the cats over time. You know,
Okay.
um, Brian Gable, who was a terrific editorial cartoonist, really, I think he took those cats and kind of muscled them up a little bit and made them into the ones that you see in perhaps 17, 18, 19 of the books, and he did that, and then he just did it till he retired. He was the editorial cartoonist for, I think, one of the biggest newspapers in Canada, and just retired. And we sought somebody who was going to help us out with that. And Martin Gannot took the wheel on a couple of the titles, or a few of the titles. And a terrific illustrator named J.P. Sandy, Pat Sandy, did, I want to say, 7, 8, 9 books for me over time. So some of it, I have some say in it, and I was an important author to Lerner. Now, if I had been with one of the 2 or 3 biggest publishers in the world, I probably would have had a little bit less say. Lerner's a little smaller than that. They're a great outfit, and they've been around for 60 years or whatever. But I mean, it's just a little more personal in the size of publisher that they were, that I could have a conversation. Now, if I said, I really want it to be so and so that's illustrating this,
Hmm.
there's all kinds of things. I mean, there's financial considerations. Maybe my so and so is going to charge 3 times what somebody else is. I have nothing to do with that. I don't pay illustrators, and the
Right.
publisher does. So naturally, you would know that the publisher would be allowed to say, here's our budget for that. um, but if they truly thought I was going to be unhappy with something, or that they thought that maybe the book itself would suffer as a result of choosing this person instead of that person, luckily it was never an issue, because we all wanted the same thing. Lerner wants a book that sells. I want a book that sells. The art
Hmm.
director wants a book that sells. My editorial director wants a book that sells. So, that's a way to keep us all happy, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So before I let you
So I
go,
have some say in it, but I wouldn't say that I would never say that, especially at my level, I was the final word on that. I had say in it, which is good. It's good to be heard. Yeah.
all right.
But
Now,
you were
before
asking.
I let you go, I do have a question about what you think or what you would suggest people that are just discovering you. Where do you think people should get into, like, if they want, like, for an example, I got into learning about you through the Adjective books, Harry, Scary, Ordinary.
Hmm.
And then obviously I'm starting to build up books from you now for my son to read and hopefully eventually my daughter. But, and then we'll probably even buy some of the math books because his math is horrid. But
Like a true writer.
yeah, well, trust me, I'm right there with them. And him and I's handwriting, both as lefties, are just
Oh my goodness.
disgusting. So, but what do you think would be a good place for people to start with you, to start getting into your books or getting into different areas to learn about you and go from there?
So if you Google Brian P. Cleary, that is Brian with an I, P as in Patrick, Cleary, like Beverly Cleary, Cleary, there's 100,000 sites or something like that. But one of the very first ones will be my own site, www.brianpcleary.com. And I have biographical stuff, I have book stuff, I have lots of information, I have activities for people if they want to
Mhm.
have that are curriculum based things. Um, you know, I would say, for really little kids, I like the phonics books because I am a former teacher of um, not quite okay. I'm a former senior literacy counselor, which means I taught three different people how to read from scratch. And so they went from being able to recognize some of the letters of the alphabet to being able to read in a handful of months. And I sort of used rhyme and repetition and illustration and some other basic things that you drill into um, uh, as a device for people to learn how to read and how to decode print. So the phonics books that I have are are a good start for somebody who's got really young kids. By the time a kid is 5, 6, 7, they might want something that explains the parts of speech in a way that, like the noun book, the adjective book, the adverb book, etc., right?
Right.
But all along, kids love poetry. They don't necessarily love writing poetry, but they love the bouncy lingo of. They love the playfulness of the language. And I've written a bunch of poetry books. And once you sort me in Amazon by Brian P. Cleary, you'll be able to find there's something called Poetry Adventures, and there's series like that that take specific types of poems, like these are all limericks or these are all haikus and things like that. So they give you, there's more writing in those books for people who want that. If you want to be able, I mean, I've always thought that children's books were a great way to explain a concept that is somewhat complex. Like if you did not know how to play chess and you and your son wanted to start playing chess, you could get Chess for Dummies, which is an inch thick,
Right.
and read 180 pages, or you could get something that is as thin as a People magazine at the library that is 32-page picture book that has 16 spreads with big photographs on it that explain what the pieces are, where they sit on the board, and what each of those things can do. What are they allowed to do? Are they allowed to go forward or diagonal or backwards or whatever? And you're playing chess, not up and running at the master's level, but you're playing chess in 20 minutes as opposed to reading a 100-page book, you know?
Right.
So I've heard, and I'm surprised, but I've heard eighth graders say, I just went to the public library and got your adverb book, and I know what an adverb is now. And they were able to see with interesting examples and repetition that this is an adverb and how you use it and everything like that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I guess it depends on the person. It depends on where they are in their reading adventure and their learning adventure, right? But probably the source of that, the way to start that would be just going to brianpcleary.com.
All right.
Yeah,
Perfect. And
it's probably how you got a hold of me.
yeah, it really was. Is I
Yeah,
searched, Google searched you, found your website,
there you
kind
go.
of where I found out that you had multiple categories or different series, and just more than I even thought was most people had. So
Mhm.
yeah. So with that, I do appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much.
If everybody wants, they can go to your website, which you've listed off. There's also authorblurb.com, where I have a profile for you set up, which is both linked into the show notes. So, Brian, I appreciate it again for you coming. I really enjoyed talking with you. If you can
Thanks.
hold on for just a moment,
I
we're
shall.
going to end. We're going to end the conversation for everybody else, but you and I will talk a little more.
Sounds good.
So thank you for making it this far. Remember, you can go to authorblurb.com, where there's plenty of stuff there for you to find. Enjoy another author. Enjoy finding that book that you love. So take the time, do me a favor, share, subscribe, enjoy the show, and tell others. Thank you.